I gotta tell you, it was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
We're about 2 weeks past the release of Resident Evil Requiem or Resident Evil 9, and with over 100 hours in the game and over 10 runs in already, I came to a modest conclusion. I really like this game. There's a lot that Requiem does that I absolutely adore, and I'm probably gonna ramble a lot and move on from one thing to another very fast, but we can start by talking about the new lead that takes the reins, Grace Ashcroft. Whenever a game franchise introduces a new protagonist, it's only natural for a fan to have doubts about whether or not they can do the role justice, especially in long-running franchises like Resident Evil, where we already have a cast of established superheroes, essentially. This series has no shortage of them, with legends like Leon, Chris, Claire, and Jill around. However, at one point you'll probably want to introduce new faces to keep things fresh, without necessarily discarding all the old characters. As many of you know, even though Grace is a protagonist in this game, she shares that role with Leon S. Kennedy, who needs no introduction at this point. So even if someone were to have doubts about Grace, it's the kind of situation where they'd be able to fall back onto Leon since he's a character that they're already familiar with. But I digress. We're still supposed to talk about Grace here, so let's get to it. I'm gonna cut right to the chase. I freaking adore Grace. And I mean, like, I can find almost no fault with this precious creature. We've only had her for a single game, but if anything happened to her, I would kill everyone in this room and then myself. There is so much good I have to say about her. I could make a whole video dedicated to her probably, but let me gather myself and move away from this bias and actually talk about why I find her great. Grace is an FBI analyst, an office worker with little to moderate combat training. She happens to be a huge introvert, as one of the game notes mentions that she barely leaves her home, so she's not the best with people, and she'll do things like stutter all the time.
Why?
Hey, are you with me?
Oh,
Hey, are you with me?
who's there? What do I do?
What does Victor want with you?
What?
Grace.
What do you...
Grace.
Wait, you're DSO. That's the,
Grace. Grace. Grace.
And one really funny out-of-bounds camera discoveries was that she's a Redditor. In one of the flashbacks, you can see her browsing Reddit looking into the Dulvey incident from Resident Evil 7. Reason I mention all of this is because the game is basically giving you all this information to display to you the contrast between her mannerisms and experience to the game's second lead, Leon. See, having two leads in this game is a very intentional choice to allow the developers to combine the claustrophobic feel that a game like RE7 or RE2 Remake had, alongside the showy, action-oriented gameplay in Resident Evil 4 Remake. Picking someone with Grace's background worked perfectly to fill in the gap for the more tense half. Her reactions to being thrown into all the horrifying situations in the game further highlight this contrast. In gameplay, you'll see her stumbling all over the place, running away from certain enemies. Some of her voice lines toward different situations demonstrate the absolute terror that she's going through. On the flip side, there's Leon, an established fan favorite that has a gigantic following. If you've played some of the previous games, you already know what to expect from him. Coming in at his oldest and perhaps most seasoned appearance yet, this guy does not mess around. Wherever he goes, you'll have piles upon piles of zombie bodies all around him. My guy still cracks his usual one-liners right in the face of death, and it's like another Tuesday to him.
I think I want a second opinion. You know, I do have a question. When's the last time you brushed your teeth?
Should've worn a helmet. Excuse me.
Design-wise, even though one may argue it's a basic look, I love the black leather jacket. I don't know what it is, but he just gives me major Resident Evil 3.5 vibes in this game. Actually, scratch that, I know exactly what it is. Besides the very cool jacket, it's also the fact that he happens to be infected in this game. So before I go into that, if you never knew this bit, Resident Evil 3.5 was what was supposed to be Resident Evil 4, before it got canned and rebuilt from the ground up into what we know today. In this scrapped version of Resident Evil 4, Leon was said to be infected by the progenitor virus, if memory serves right, and a big part of that game's story was his struggle with containing it. Now, in Resident Evil 9, you have a similar idea, with the T virus apparently still being active in the bodies of Raccoon City survivors. It got to claim multiple victims, and we get to witness Leon trying to fight it in this game. Leon is simply too powerful at this point, so it felt like they wanted to find a way to nerf him somehow. And even then, it's only in a select few moments that this actually slows him down. The story has a very intriguing premise, immediately grabbing my attention with the use of Alyssa Ashcroft, who is a returning character from Resident Evil Outbreak, one of my favorite Resident Evil games. Alyssa Ashcroft is introduced in Outbreak as a reporter that did work in Raccoon City, and we actually do hear from her again later in notes in a game like Resident Evil 7, but actually seeing her here in Resident Evil 9 was really nice. So Grace is sent to investigate a bunch of dead bodies at a certain hotel. This hotel happens to be where she lost her mom, Alyssa, to a murderer 8 years before the events of the game. Her boss at work, who sent her there alone, should be caught and put on trial, but that's besides the point for now. While investigating there, she gets kidnapped by Victor Gideon, the seemingly main antagonist, and put into a mysterious location, and now she has to do what it takes to survive. Shortly after, Leon crosses paths with her, but it doesn't take long for them to get separated, and once again they have to do what it takes to escape. Setting aside the premise of the story, Leon and Grace are seen interacting with each other a good amount throughout the story. In fact, I'd say it's one of my favorite parts of the story. It's handled very well, and they have a dynamic that's like father-daughter, and it's really heartwarming to see it develop as the game goes on. Whenever you play as Grace, you go through the anxiety and fear that she does. Her performance is some of the best acting I've seen in video games. Her voice actor, Angela Sant Albano, I probably butchered that, did a stellar job both voicing her and also doing the motion capture for her. Grace's expressions in the various cutscenes embody her tense feelings extremely well. Likewise, Nick Apostolidis, I probably also butchered that, does an amazing job for Leon. By this point, this is his third rodeo as Leon in the franchise, starting with Resident Evil 2 Remake, going into Resident Evil 4 Remake, and now coming back in Resident Evil 9. Although if you want to be technical about it, I believe he also voiced Leon in a CGI miniseries called Infinite Darkness from a few years ago. He pulls off the seasoned take on Leon amazingly well. His work on Leon's more gruff intonation in Requiem feels natural, and it allows him to have some really great moments. One of my favorite aspects of Grace's story is seeing how clearly terrified she is of the situation that she's thrown into, but this fear slowly develops into some semblance of bravery once she has to take care of a little girl called Emily. Like, not even full-on bravery, just like a shred of it. Like, she's really trying her best here. One may argue that this trope of like looking after a child has been overdone in Resident Evil, but I feel like this is a fresh take on it, given Grace's personality. She puts her life on the line protecting this girl, and this bravery does not immediately put away all her fears. She still is very much terrified, but at the same time, she does not want any harm to come to this girl, especially considering that Emily basically helps Grace escape the monster-infested area that she's put in. On Leon's side, we'll occasionally hear him talk over radio comms to a female operator simply named Mission Coordinator. We find out later that this is none other than Sherry Birkin. I was very glad to see her again after a long absence, with her last mainline appearance being in Resident Evil 6 all the way back in 2012, a whole 14 years ago. I like that the two of them are actually talking to each other in this game. 6 made it feel like they've been distant for a while. Mind you, I would have been just as happy if we got to see Claire and Sherry interacting, but after how horribly Resident Evil 2 Remake handled the interactions between Leon and Sherry, I really liked what I saw in Resident Evil 9.
Who's this?
This is Sherry.
Okay.
Grace's section mainly takes place at a care center that's owned by Victor Gideon, the game's antagonist. The layout and design of it is reminiscent of the typical Resident Evil experience in an extravagant location with some cool rooms scattered all around it. It works very well with Grace since the tight areas make for tense encounters with the zombies. Though the contrast is funny when you walk through these very same corridors as Leon, and because he's Leon, he'll just destroy everything with ease. Nostalgia is all over the place with Resident Evil 9, especially when you play as Leon. The second half of the game takes place in the place where it all started for him, Raccoon City. You come across Easter eggs and notes with familiar names, and even visit some notable locations from before. This game actually has you explore more of Raccoon City than Resident Evil 3 Remake ever dreamed of. It's honestly insulting to that game. Raccoon City has this post-apocalyptic feel to it that really made me think of something like Fallout. I loved the desolate atmosphere of it. One of my favorite Easter eggs is the one at the RPD where you solve a puzzle that apparently Barry had set up for his co-workers. Yes, the same Barry Burton. You obtain a key to a locker with the name tag Jojo, which is by itself a reference to the original Resident Evil 2 locker by the same name. Once you open the locker, you find 2 tickets to the Raccoon City Zoo. This is a blatant nod to the zoo level in Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, where you actually get to explore this place and fight a whole bunch of infected animals. Under the tickets, you'll find a PlayStation 1 with Capcom games like the original Resident Evil 1, Street Fighter, and Mega Man. I've seen varying reactions to the game and some of the things that it does. It is the sort of game that I think is very easy for me to understand why someone would have issues with, especially story-wise. As much as I'd like to delve in great detail and mention every single thing I can think of, I unfortunately don't want to make this video too long. Maybe I'm gonna make another one, who knows? But putting that aside, Resident Evil 9 has some interesting ideas. Some that worked well, and others that unfortunately weren't fully fleshed out. One of the big bombs that they hit us with is the return of Zeno. They never really tell it in your face who exactly he is, but a certain villain later on calls him an imitation, so that gives us a good idea. They also drop another lore bomb at the very end where he's apparently the leader of the Connections, the same organization that was set up in Resident Evil 7 and also had somewhat of a presence in Resident Evil 8. The problem with this guy is that it feels like they could have done more with him. A lot of my issues with the story actually revolve around this guy. On paper, having him in as a twist worked pretty well. I'd imagine people initially thought this was Wesker's grand return, and even if it wasn't Wesker himself, I'd be okay with that. The idea of having another Wesker clone is not too crazy. After all, we had Alex Wesker in Revelations 2, and we already know that there's a whole Wesker Children project that cloned multiple of them. It's a plot point that they can fall back on if they want to. But one of Zeno's many problems, in my opinion, is that he could have used more choreography. Compare what I'm about to show you of him to what Wesker does in Resident Evil 5.
Aren't we fancy?
Maybe you can argue it was intentional that he's not as powerful as the original Wesker, which actually is an idea that I like. But then let's move on to something else that I think should have been done, but hasn't been done. So some of you already know that this game has 2 endings. In the good ending, you fight Victor Gideon as Leon. In the bad ending, there's no fight and the game just ends on a very abrupt note. I think having a Xeno fight in the bad ending could have been a neat idea to cook with just to have a contrast between the 2 endings. I have no idea how Grace would be able to fend off Xeno with his Wesker powers, but I'm sure the writers could have worked with something. Another point of debate with this game is what they've done with Spencer. Now, Oswald E. Spencer is a name that should need no introduction, but for better or worse, he's mostly a background character in the series, so I fully understand why someone may not know him. And if you happen to not know him, he is one of the founders of Umbrella, the company that was basically responsible for the Raccoon City outbreak and destruction. Spencer was also the owner of the mansion we play in Resident Evil 1. I believe we get to see him in Resident Evil 5 for the first time in person, having a conversation with Wesker before getting absolutely demolished. So, the franchise has made it crystal clear that Spencer is a man that only cares about himself. He founded one of the most evil organizations in the Resident Evil franchise, and it's natural to assume that he contributed a lot to all kinds of vile research for his own gain. From Resident Evil 5, we know that one of the goals he sought out was to be immortal, someone above humanity, a god.
Ironic. isn't it? For one who has the right to be a god.
The right to be a god. You. Arrogant even until the end.
Now, Resident Evil Requiem does something very intriguing. They present a human side of Spencer. We come across video footage of Grace's mom, Alyssa, having an interview with him. In it, he says he regrets the destruction that his work caused and wanted to do something good before leaving the Earth. To longtime fans like myself, this is probably one of the last things we'd expect to see get revealed in any game, but oddly enough, for me at least, I didn't mind it. They didn't try to paint him as a good guy. They didn't say that he was forced to do any of what he did. They didn't make up excuses for what he'd done. They just said that he's aware that he's done a lot of horrible deeds. Now, this may directly conflict with what he said in Resident Evil 5, which leads me to believe it's either him being senile or we're seeing a retcon in the works. Resident Evil Requiem has a bunch of things like this that can conflict with some of the stuff we already know. But something that I vouch for that makes up for a lot of it for me is the execution and the direction of things like the cinematography and the choreography of the game. A lot of the scenes in this game are shot so beautifully and professionally that it's hard for me to not admire what I'm seeing, even with the weaker moments of the story.
Raccoon City was where it all began for me. Where it all happened, I couldn't make a difference. So I am here now.
We can't stop Zeno.
Also, I'm not about to give excuses to bad or questionable writing, but even a bunch of my other favorite Resident Evil games have story moments that either take me out of the experience or just raise a gigantic question mark. Heck, Resident Evil 5 is an S-tier game for me, and a lot of people consider that game to be nowhere above a B-tier for multiple reasons, and I easily understand why. At this point, it's just a matter of whether or not a game clicks for me, and a game like Resident Evil 5 is special to me for so many reasons. One of which is it being my first console online experience that I was really excited for and was addicted to. I'll talk briefly about Victor Gideon since I barely said anything about him, but I actually like him more than I thought I would. He initially comes off as nothing special and I thought he may end up being forgettable, but the way he absolutely demolished Zeno and displayed his prowess at the end made me realize that he did the bike segment with Leon for the love of the game. That segment fooled all of us into thinking he was just some throwaway. This guy was so obsessed with Spencer's work that even after the revelation that Grace is not in any way special as we all assumed by the story beats, he thought it's still all part of a plan that Spencer had, and it didn't reduce his obsession at all. If he wasn't already delusional, well, by the end of the game, he sure is. Requiem has a few cool bosses, but one that I really didn't expect to see, and hence I gotta give a shout out to, is the giant spider. Resident Evil 2 Remake and 3 Remake both cut out spiders, and I remember seeing arachnophobia debates about whether or not they should have been in the games. I'm personally of the opinion that horror games should make you feel uncomfortable, and spiders are a great way to achieve that end for a lot of people, including myself. So seeing a giant spider boss that was animated so well alongside baby spiders to go with that part was a very pleasant surprise for me. I love that they included them. I wasn't a fan of how they were just gone in 2 and 3 Remake. Something that I like about Leon's section is that even though there's a lot to explore, a lot of it is optional, so you can skip a good chunk of it on replays if you want to. Leon also has these attaché cases hanging on some places that contain items. I do wish Grace had something like this, but perhaps they didn't do that to retain the distinction where she's more about survival, while Leon has the RE4-like aspects. I think I should also mention the grand puzzle that had the whole community getting together to figure things out. I believe it is simply titled The Final Puzzle in the game, and it's intentionally kept very vague as to what it actually is. Requiem does something no other Resident Evil game has done. It brings a Call of Duty Zombies-like Easter egg. Now, if you're not familiar with how COD Zombies Easter eggs work, let me just tell you that they're some of the most complex, mind-boggling puzzles in gaming. You have to do ridiculous steps at times that you would normally never think of doing, aka you're probably just gonna look up the answer. In Requiem's case, the first step involves you doing absolutely nothing for 15 minutes in one specific room, then you make sure you clear said room in a specific way where you don't kill the enemies but push them into an environmental hazard. This is followed by escaping that area of the game before returning to another one, finding a toilet, flushing that toilet exactly 8 times, and then in a specific room soon after, you will find a doll. You don't do anything with the doll in that same playthrough. You need another playthrough to actually finish the puzzle. And so in that second playthrough, you go to one of the story's puzzles and enter a specific long combination that should result in you solving the Easter egg. Absolutely insane stuff, and I love that they have something like this. I honestly think they should implement more of them in future games to give the community something to work towards. Putting that aside, I want to give a shout out to how they balanced out resource management. Just as it should work in Resident Evil games, on first playthroughs you probably won't find everything there is to find, so you may find less resources compared to later ones where you'll be more acquainted with the game and its secrets. I find Resident Evil 9's gameplay to be great. Its replayability is also very nice, and an average Resident Evil fan knows that these games are made to be replayed multiple times. To give a somewhat recent example, I have over 500 hours on Resident Evil 4 Remake because that game is just so much fun to replay, and I have a lot of hours in the classics as well. Having said that, man, I wish the orphanage section was skippable on replays because, bro, it's literally just a waiting simulator. It may not matter much to people who play the game once and revisit it like years later, but I love replaying the Resident Evil games. Being able to save 5 to 10 minutes on potentially 100 runs is gonna go a long way for me. One of my favorite things about Resident Evil Requiem is also the ability to choose between gameplay perspective. At first, it is recommended you play first-person mode with Grace and third-person mode with Leon. But you don't have to stick to this recommendation, and you can switch it from the get-go if you're not a fan of either. I did the recommended choice at first and mostly did third-person after that, as I'm a bigger fan of being able to see the characters that I play as. What I love about both choices as well is that they each have their own merits. Third-person mode allows you to see some detail that you'd otherwise miss in first-person by not seeing your character at all. For example, in the very beginning when running away from the girl as Grace, playing in third-person will have her run away more frantically than in first-person, and she'll trip every now and then, and this does not happen at all in first-person. In terms of replay value, you have a couple of costumes to unlock, as well as a whole bunch of bonus weapons, infinite ammo, charms, and collectibles to look forward to. You could complete some in-game challenges like beating the game under 4 hours to get some points to be able to buy those from the bonus shop. I do kinda wish there were more charms though, to be honest. Also, one thing to note is the weird way this game handles New Game Plus. You don't actually have New Game Plus in the conventional way. You have to start a fresh new game on replays, but it's not actually a fresh game because things like charms will carry over in your item box, and Leon will be able to access the armory much earlier. I kinda wish they just had the conventional New Game Plus to keep things more separated. I also sorta wish you could carry over Grace's health and firearm upgrades on replays, but alas, it's not possible. After beating this game for the first time, I thought to myself that if I had to rate my enjoyment of the experience on a scale of 1 to 10, it would be between a 9 to 9.5 out of 10. But the problem right now is, we know that this game will most likely get some form of DLC sometime down the line. The last mainline entry, Resident Evil 8 or Resident Evil Village, did well enough to release one side campaign about a year after its launch. And that's not to mention some of the neat additions, like the addition of the third-person mode for the story, and more characters for Mercenaries mode. Unfortunately, Resident Evil 8's DLC didn't hold a candle to 7's post-launch support. Resident Evil 7 boasts 2 side campaigns, multiple shorter stories, and a bunch of minigames. My dream is to see this kind of support happen again for a Resident Evil game that I really like. A very convenient pause here to talk about the recent statement given by the director of the game, Koshi Nakanishi. He's confirmed that we're getting a story expansion, photo mode, and a minigame of sorts, whatever that means. That could mean something like Mercenaries or something else entirely. I would be very down for Mercenaries or honestly something like Raid mode as well. I'm a big fan of that mode. So even though at the moment I'm setting at a 9 out of 10 for Requiem, it's very liable to change depending on how the DLC will turn out. But yeah, I absolutely adore Resident Evil Requiem. This is a video that I kind of wanted to put out because this game deserves at least a video from me. Maybe I'll make more later, who knows, but we'll have to wait and see for that. But for the time being, dear viewers, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video and giving it the time of your day. That's all for now, and hopefully I see you again with another banger video sometime soon. You guys take care, stay safe, and stay healthy. Bye-bye now.